Okay, that's going to look awesome when we see that. All right, so there we are. So here's how I like to flow the classes when I teach Android. All right, I usually start with like an overview, what we're going to do. We tour through the tool. We'll start a project. We'll build an activity, a service, and then we'll show you some tips on testing this. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Pretty much the very, very top level, skimming across all the services of Android. Okay, super high level, but it's 90 minutes, right? So what are you going to need to do to build your first app? All right, so you got to download it, get that installed. That sometimes is the most frustrating and time-consuming part of the process. So it's getting better. Believe it or not, it's way better, all right, than when we first started doing this. Then you need to start the Android Studio project. I'll show you how to do that. We'll build a layout. Layout is what the UI looks like. All right. We'll create an activity. That's some Java code. We'll build a service. Again, that's some Java code. And I'll explain a little bit more why we need services versus just doing it all in the activity. And then we'll test it. I'll show you how to test the thing. And then I'll show you, if we have time, I'll show you what my the back end of the Google Play Store looks like. I have a couple apps out there that are growing very old, and they're basically abandonware at this point. Let's just be serious. That are out there, but they'd still actually, I get like, you know, $5-10 from them every month. It's nice because I get a little check from Google every month. It's fun, right? So if this is what it should look like the first time you start it up. So I'm going to just start a new project, right? And we're going to call this weather. Yeah, weather temp, right? Like temp as in temperature, not as in temporary. And so this allows you to put your company domain. When you sign an app, you do a self-signed signature. It includes your company domain and includes some information about you, so that when you update it, it needs to be self-signed by that same cert each time. Don't lose it, because otherwise you won't be able to update your app in the App Store. All right? It's not like where on iOS you actually have to have them, you know, co-sign it, but you just do a self-signed cert and it goes out. That just means it's at least from the same person who wrote it originally, right? And then we're not going to need C++ support. And then this bottom, it's like wherever you like to put your projects. So I have a special place on my machine that I put all my projects in the projects directory. But you're welcome to, you know, SRC is a popular place, or, you know, my stuff or code or whatever. And then it's just going to try to put the same name as the application name. All right. So I'll go next here. Super easy. Now, you can use this IDE to develop a lot of different types of apps. We're just going to do a phone and tablet app this time. But you can do it for a watch, TV, whatever else they're trying to sell you. So now this is the first time we have to kind of really make a decision. All right, it's asking about the version of the SDK that we want to use to require when we build this, when we run this app. And right now it's set at all the way back at ice cream sandwich. So if we drop this drop down, you can tell that, you know, we're actually up to 7, right? 711 now. We could go all the way back to gingerbread if we wanted to, but why do we make this choice? Well, if we look here, we can tell what the distribution of each of those versions of the operating system are. And this is current up-to-date information from Google. It's saying that if I want to penetrate at least 98% of the market, I can go back to ice cream sandwich. All right. So each of these versions, newer versions, as you go down the screen here, have improvements to the operating system. right? So if you want to, for example, support something that's only in Marshmallow, you can do that. You can say you must have Marshmallow to install my app, okay? But that means that you're only penetrating 15% of the market, right? So if we want to go cast a wider net, we can go all the way down to ice cream sandwich. Why wouldn't we go all the way back to gingerbread? Well, if you go all the way back to gingerbread, you run into some difficulty in some of the features that came in later. Most significantly, the way that the screen and layout's handled. And it's a lot more work to support versions, gingerbread and before. You can still do it, but my guess is if somebody's still rocking a gingerbread phone, that they don't really care about updating their apps, right? So they are they're so probably not our target audience. We've got 98% at ice cream sandwich and not a whole lot of paying. So that's what we're going to support in this app, right? So I'll say OK here. Well, let's go next. Okay, so but that's not the end of the world, right? That we're supporting an older version. What we'll see is that you can use the support library and a couple other tools that allow you to statically link in some capabilities that are in later versions of Android. So you can be backwards compatible without having to do a lot of work yourself. So Google does provide some help there. Okay, the next thing it's going to ask is about an activity, right? So if you've never written an app, you don't really know what an activity is yet. Activity is what shows up on the screen. Okay, so anything that's going to be on the screen is going to be in some form of activity. That's the window, basically, right? That's the controller for the window. So you could have an app with no activity, but that wouldn't be terribly interesting. This gives you a couple things, and it's interesting what they've done here is it kind of goes from like some of these are just templates that you can easily fill in, and some are like more like sample code. There's a lot of stuff that they do. So I'm just going to pick this one because it's a nice balance between a lot of sample code and just enough to get you going. Okay, so we'll pick an empty activity. Go next, right? And then now they're asking for a name. So this is actually a Java class. Okay, so I like to use the Java class naming conventions that that Sun puts out, and it's going to have camel case starting upper, and I'm going to call this temperature activity, right? And I'm going to also ask it to generate a layout file. The layout file is actually going to be an XML file that will have all the widgets that are going to be displayed on the screen. Okay, and it's nice that it's an XML file because then you don't have to. It's more geared specifically to layout than a lot of Java code, and you're not tempted to stick some sort of functionality in the middle of the layout when you should just be concentrating on the view, right? So that model view controller thing where the activity is more the controller and the view is that layout XML file. All right, and now here we go. We're going to say we're going to be backwards compatible, right? So I'm going to turn on app compat, and that's just saying I'm going to include this library so that if I want to use a newer feature that's found in later versions all the way up to 7 for layout management and activity control, that I'm still good if someone wants to install an older version. So it's just going to statically link that in. All right, so I'll go finish, and now it's going to launch the IDE. All right, so any questions on this while this chugs away? That's a good question. Is there a direct one-to-one correspondence? You don't actually have to have a layout XML file. You can code that all up in Java if you want. Okay, so you could create your own. You can set it up so you have one layout for landscape and another for portrait. Okay, and you can have different layout files for different screen sizes, right? So if you have a tablet versus a phone versus a watch, you can have all different layout files for those, all controlled by the same activity, right? Yes, question?
Does, I don't know, does it accept CSS or is that just web for you guys?
No, no CSS. No, it's not like JavaFX, right? JavaFX lets you do a CSS to determine color and stuff like that. There is theming and stuff built into the framework, but it's not through CSS. A caveat to that, there's a newer layout format that they've just put out. It's still in beta, so I didn't include it in this one, that is supposed to be smart enough to handle that a little better. So, but that still remains to be seen. Based on what they've said, it looks promising. I just haven't used it personally yet, so I don't want to teach it. Yeah. Oh, also you can have different layouts for different countries and carriers and devices, manufacturers even. So you can get all crazy with layouts. So very good question. So here's the activity. We'll just explore real quick. Once we bring up the IDE for the first time, some of you might see it busily working down here where it's parsing and indexing files. That's fine, that's normal. Let that finish before you start worrying about errors in here, because the editor likes to inform you of errors like right away, right? So sometimes it just hasn't finished pulling in all the dependencies and it thinks there's like, it can't find, java.lang.string, and you think there's a problem, but just wait. The other thing that kind of trips people up sometimes, see this like ellipse here and this like closed out thing? So it kind of hides some of the Java noise there. So if you really want to see what you're importing, go ahead and expand that. There's a couple other little things like that I'll point out as we go. Right now we're in the project view here, and you can see that it's kind of divided it up into our Java code and resources and Gradle scripts, right? So for now, we're just going to concentrate on the activity. What do you need? Okay. What you can see in the activity here is that we're already referencing this layout, and it also brought up the layout, right? Real nice. It has a hello world there. Okay. So we're all set up. So you see that this doesn't say .java here. It is a Java file. They just don't display the file extension in the tree view here. And then, let's say you're over here and you want to say, where is this file in my list of files? You can hit this little button. This little button is super handy. It's like a target button, and it shows you, okay, this is where I am in my directory structure, right? So this is the default layout for here. So this is like the question where you had a default layout for portrait phone, right? So that's the layout you're going to get, right? If you turn it this way, it'll try to make this layout fit, right? But it may get a little wanky. All right, so that's why we have multiple layouts per. Another thing I want to show you up here is the format that we're in, which I'm suddenly not. Oh, there it is. Okay, so if you hit this and you see project, this is going to be more representative of the way the files are laid out on the disk. I actually prefer this view. It's not the default, but I think it's the best view to avoid confusion when you start working with the files. Don't worry about it. If you get stuck trying to find it, but it's basically under this little either one arrow or two arrow triangles here, project, and then that lets you see your actual directory structure. You'll see that there's an outer project directory. That's because you could have multiple different apps in the same project, right? So you might have a phone app and a watch app and a whatever app, all in the same project. And then under that, you'll see this source directory, and then under that, you'll see main, Java, and resources, right? So we were just there in the other layout. It's just a different perspective on that same layout. But that gets confusing for people and frustrating when you can't find your files. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. But it does make it nice for once you have a large project and you're trying to organize things. from different perspectives to have that capability. All right, the emulator. Now this is, I know you guys were having some problems with this earlier, so I will walk through what worked for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a device. You can see I've created 3 already, right? Well, I'm just going to do a quick Nexus 5 here. The reason that I chose a Nexus 5, you can even go down to a smaller phone, is you don't want to choose something that has a huge amount of memory for the emulator, because it's going to take up a lot of the laptop's memory when you're running the emulator. Okay, so that makes it just frustrating to actually, use the stupid IDE. And then if it needs anything to install this, it should prompt you, but I've got fairly recent install here. All right, so I'm going to hit next. And now this is asks me what version of the operating system I want to install on the emulator. So I am going to install Nougat, which is the latest version, just to make it easy on myself, right? If you should really have several different versions of the emulator set up to test on older versions of the operating system. Even though you have backwards compatibility libraries available now, they don't always work exactly as you would expect. So just for now, I'm just going to use Nougat, but I would suggest that you always have a couple of them up your sleeve to test with. Yeah.
How did you get to this window again, the virtual device?
Sure. Yes, there is a this guy here, very cute little, looks like a robot in front of an iPhone. That's the AVD manager. That's what I got to do. Okay. So I'll go back here, create it. Next. And then Nougat. And then next. And then startup orientation. All this stuff is fairly straightforward. Sometimes in here you'll have an opportunity to download later versions. Oh, let me take one step. One thing to point out here is, yes, the phone is, I think this phone is ARM, right? And I know the Nexus 5 is ARM, but this is saying it's going to run it as though it was an x86 64-bit. That's just because I set that up just because it runs a heck of a lot faster on the laptop that way, because that's the native architecture of the laptop's processor. So it can use pretty much the same thing that you would with, with virtual machine or something like that. We're just going to say, I'm just going to leave all the defaults and say finish here.
This doesn't affect the app, right? It only affects the emulator.
Right. Yes, this is just the emulator. So then, like I said, you should have a couple different emulators up your sleeve with different versions to test with. Right. So this app should work on anything down to, what did we say, Lollipop, right? And then you launch it. So the first time it launches, it usually takes a couple minutes. So I'm going to launch the first one that I already had set up earlier. Okay, and you just hit this little play button here, and this this little feedback will let you know it started. Okay, I'm ignoring this warning, but I did get a warning. It'll still boot up. I think it was a performance warning. So it's going to launch the emulator. It puts a nice skin around it now. It used to just be the actual window, and they also have these nice little things you can click. You used to have to know some sort of like, Control Shift whatever to get the home button and things like that. So this is an area that they've improved vastly. So now my emulator's running, right? And I can try out my Hello World. All right. Start that up. So it's going. What I did was I hit play here, right? And then it's going to show me what I've got connected, and I've got my Nexus 5X emulator connected. And then these are also available if I wanted to start this. I recommend launching the emulator before you hit play, okay? Because otherwise it gets stuck in this long loop to launch the emulator, and then you launch the emulator, and sometimes it starts to install the app before the emulator is actually ready to take it. So I recommend that launch the emulator once, plug your laptop in, and just leave it running, okay? And you don't have to kill it every time you restart your app, all right? So we'll hit OK. And now if we go out here, we can see, if I'll gyrate my screen so that we can see everything. Okay, it's building the app and compiled it. So the compilation is it builds class files from Java, turns them into what are called dex files, and then those dex files are put into a APK, and the APK is then copied to the emulator or to the phone, okay? And then it's launched. So it launched our activity, okay? This is actually running on the emulator, so if I hit home, it goes away, and if I want to see it again, how do I, oh, there it is. The new NuGet there that I'm not familiar with. Here is my app. Okay, so it's actually running now. It can emulate different speeds for the network connection. It can emulate GPS, so you can send it a GPX file with just a whole bunch of GPS coordinates, and it's going to pretend that you've got the GPS going. And that's very handy because I wrote a cycling app, turn-by-turn direction cycling app, and I almost dropped my laptop off my handlebars a couple times when I was testing it. So that's the first lab. Okay, let me just quickly refresh here. Started the app, created the activity and the layout, told it to do a lollipop as a minimum IDE, or sorry, minimum API. We looked around a little bit at the layouts, created the virtual device, and launched it. Okay. Any questions? All right, go for it. We'll reconvene at 15 after, okay, quarter after.